Welcome to the Enterprise GTM podcast, hosted by Tim Zonka and Vidya Raman. Each episode takes a deep dive into how to successfully maneuver the unique dynamics of enterprise go-to-market while candidly discussing successful approaches, pitfalls, and failures alike. Our guests are seasoned company founders, GTM execs, technology buyers, and end users. Please note that the views expressed by individuals in these podcasts are not to be treated as investment advice. They are also not representing the views of their employers, current or previous.
Welcome, everybody. Today, Vidya and I were excited to have Bharathi Rajan, VP of Enterprise Data and Applications at Swire Coca-Cola, in our podcast. Bharathi, welcome.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Vidya, for having me. I'm excited to join you both.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also a little bit about Swire Coca-Cola and your team there.
Bharathi Rajan, I lead enterprise data and insights at Swire Coca-Cola. Been with the company for about 2.5 years, and my primary objective, my role is data, anything and everything related to, and I want to be specific, it's about structured data. So right from getting the data in, or right from data strategy, where do we want to be a few years from now? What kind of data are we looking at? All the way to how do we derive insights of this data and how does that impact and help the business? That entire portfolio is under my leadership here at Swire.
And what's your team look like?
My team, somewhere between 40 and 50 people right now. This is a team that has existed for about 18 months to 2 years. So it's a relatively new team that we've built out really from a capability standpoint. So data engineers, BI developers, you have data governance, you have systems and data architecture, application development, master data, self-service strategy around Power Platform. All of that is under me.
Great. And are they all relatively local to you, or are they distributed around either the country or the world?
So Swire, just as a background, Swire Coca-Cola USA, we manufacture and distribute in the 13 states across Western United States. And so most of my team here sits here in Draper, Utah. I have a few people that are outside, but are in the Swire territories.
Cool. And so as many of our regular listeners probably recognize at this point, you're a unique kind of guest in our podcast, especially with a team that size. And even though you say, hey, it's, for this portion of the US, even some of the distribution across that. So our guests have usually been squarely from startup land. And so I think what makes it so interesting to get a chance to talk with you, and frankly, valuable to our ecosystem of listeners, is you're the kind of person that the founders that we typically talk to would love to do business with at some point. You have the kind of, budget or wallet within your organizations to make a big impact on startups. And so a big part of the reason we're glad to have you here today is we think it'd really be valuable to understand your point of view on the world so that the founders that are the main listeners for this podcast, they can start to prepare themselves for what's that next big enterprise sale. So with that in mind, I just want to dig a little bit deeper. One of the things that drives a lot of either purchase decisions, maybe from your point of view, or a selling motion from a founder point of view, is what matters most to you. And so let's start a little with KPIs, especially some of the KPIs either at Swire broadly or those that you and your team track. Can you talk a little bit about some of the high-level business priorities as you see them for your organization?
Sure. So from a KPI standpoint, or what my team is focused on, so I've introduced something called a North Star metric for my team. What a North Star metric is where it's a combined goal that the team comes together for. They have individual goals for their team. So a data engineering team would have a separate goal, compared to a BI team. But they all have the shared goal that they are looking at, and that's their North Star, basically. And that's why it's called the North Star metric, and that's the data quality. If we don't share that, the reason why data quality is a shared goal for us is because data is, as people say, is the new oil, right? It's the shiny new object to me that people don't understand. We've had data and we've collected data for so long, but people don't understand that data is so foundational for us to do anything in the AI and forecast space, or any, even leveraging it for machine learning and everything. You've got to have good foundational data. If we don't have that, how do we move forward? And to that effect, your data quality becomes really, really important. And that's one of our biggest goals for the year and even for, the next few years. How do we maintain the data quality at the highest standards? Data quality for me is not just one aspect of data, right? It also includes accuracy, making sure that the data is available on time, it's at the right place, people who need it have it available in the right format. All of that is included in data quality for us.
You talked about like the North Star goal as being something that you probably said it better, but the way I internalized it was like, has relevance and importance outside and across groups, not just your team. What about within your team? Do you have any like KPIs or goals or objectives that might be a little bit more specific to your team that help pay those broader goals off?
I have 7 different teams under me. And so if I take data engineering, how do I make sure that the data is available and is in the right format and it's available for reporting? That's one goal for data engineering. For BI, it's like, how do I make sure that the report has run, the data is checked, and it's available to the end users by a certain time? That's a SLA, we have an SLA of having it ready by 8 a.m. every day. So making sure we hit that SLA. If we don't hit that SLA, what's going on? Do we have an unrealistic SLA? What is it? So those are a couple of key performance indicators that we look at. Data governance is, we've put policies and standards in place. Do we have processes that are adhering to these standards and policies? How many of them are exceptions? Do we need exceptions? What does it mean to have these exceptions? All of that. So that's another KPI for the data governance team.
You mentioned things like users and SLAs where the data is, updated and fresh and accurate by 8 a.m. Like, who are the customers that your teams serve? Can you tell us about them?
Yep. So customers is everyone in the enterprise, right? Everyone needs some sort of a report. When you go to a finance team, they want to see what the volume was and how are we doing against our budget. And if you talk to someone from sales, they'll want to know what the volume was for yesterday. Did they make their numbers? What was the dollar amount against the volume that they hit yesterday? And then you talk to logistics and they'd like to know how many cases were delivered. Was it on time? Was the order fulfilled? So there's a metric that we as an organization also look at. It's called OTIF, or on time in full. That what it means is there was a order that was placed for, say, 20 cases. Did we fulfill that order and, in totality, right? And that's an important metric for us because our customers want the entire order delivered, not just partial orders, right? And so that's an important order for, say, someone in logistics. Did we deliver all of the orders? I mean, it was a complete order and was not partial order. For me, our customers are everyone across in the organization, starting at the C-suite all the way to an account executive who's using this data to do his daily work.
And what about kind of one more question for me, and then I want to kind of give the floor over to Vidya to pepper you with questions. But you've been giving us a lot of background on what things look like at Swire Coca-Cola, but you were a leader at many other well-known enterprises, Goldman Sachs, Optum Health, Medtronic. What do you see as similar and what do you see as different insofar as the sorts of, goals, the role that you and your team play in the different industries?
That's a really great question, Tim. Data is data at the end of the day, right? For each business, it's a different lens. So if you look at Optum, you would say, if you're looking at Optum Rx, you would say, hey, how many prescriptions were delivered? Were they the right prescriptions? Did I have them delivered on time, right? Whereas if you look at Goldman, right, how many, from an operations point of view, did we complete all of the transactions that we needed to complete? How did we complete them? Were they completed on time? Did we have any errors? What were causing the errors? All of that. So I think the data in itself is being used in a similar way. But I mean, the KPIs are different in the general sense that because they are different industries, so they may differ. But at the end of the day, it's similar, I would say. One of the reasons why I love being in this role where I am is even though it's a different industry, it's the same data. And how do you use that data for that specific industry? And that's the fun behind it.
That's actually a very unique lens through which to look at the data industry. At least in my experience, I've seen that quite a few data leaders would tend to, treat their own industry and problems as being very unique and special. So I think it's very fascinating to hear the way that you look at things. And I'm sure that must have been helpful to you, particularly in being able to translate some of your learnings from, say, a Medtronic or a Goldman to where you are today. So that's
Absolutely. It's a transferable skill in the sense that you take what you do with data, you learn the industry and you say, okay, how can I apply what I've learned from my previous experience into this new industry, knowing how this industry works.
Absolutely. And, speaking of industries, Bharti, many early stage startup founders who build products for teams like yours, like the data team, be it a data engineering team or a BI team, they generally don't tend to have the kind of know-how that you have about your industry, the goals, the KPIs, and so on and so forth. Basically, some of the things that you mentioned. These founders often tend to be pretty technical and most likely will use the language of your more technical end users. And so the question here I have for you is, when you hear a pitch from some of these founders who talk tech, product, and more tech and more product, how do you respond? And please don't be afraid to be blunt when you're answering this question.
Good question, Vidya. I think for me, it's one of the things that I always tell my team who are quite technical, or, they're the most technical in the enterprise, is you have to learn the business. You have to understand the business. If you want to do anything meaningful with the data and with how you want to change the business, you have to know how the business functions. That's my advice to every startup founder there. Know the business, talk about, like, one of my pet peeves is people will come and talk to me and say, oh, Swire Coca-Cola or Coca-Cola. And it's like, they're two different things, right? Swire Coca-Cola is different from Swire Coca-Cola USA, or Swire Coca-Cola USA is different from the Coke company. So understanding these nuances and talking and understanding how to approach your customers just by getting to know more information and diving in deep is going to make a difference. That first dialogue that you're going to have is going to be different. And then from there on, you can get more technical. You can talk the tech talk and, you can talk about your product because that's what you're there to showcase. But know the nuances of the business, at least initially, how the business is functioning, at least have a high level view before you get deep into the tech conversation. My team, I basically tell them to run as a business. And if you can't talk in business language, even though you're a technical team, you're not going to get anywhere with the business. So how do you speak that business language before you get into the technical details?
This is super duper insightful, Bharti. I think many of us tend to think of technical users, like as in data engineers, analysts, we tend to think of them as, not having much domain expertise or business knowledge. But it's very insightful to know that a leader like yourselves, who has these kinds of people reporting to your org, you're pushing them to have a business know-how. So then it behooves of the founders, the early stage startups who are trying to sell to some of those users, to also, at the very least, if not knowing the nuances of the business, at the very least, have a common domain language to relate with. So that's super insightful. Thank you for sharing that. So, just delving a little bit deeper into this aspect of, selling products to your more technical teammates, if you will, when do you get involved in some of these discussions? Like, do you tend to want to hear about why one of your teammates is particularly excited about a product once they've kicked the tires on it? Or do you like to be brought into the loop up front?
It's a combination of both for me, Vidya. The way I might be at a conference and I might look at something, or if I'm scrolling through LinkedIn, I'm like, this product looks interesting. Let's understand this better, right? So I might tell my team to look into it, go reach out to someone and find out more. Or if I'm at a conference and someone reaches out and say, hey, can we talk about this? And I want to learn more. And I end up talking to them after that because I'm interested in learning about the product. There have been times where a team member has used a product in their previous life and they think that it's a fantastic product and they know. My suggestion to them was always, hey, compare the products you may have used in the previous life, but here are other four products that I've heard of, or, there's someone else using it in my bottler community. Let's compare and contrast and then come back to me. So we've done that as well. So it's been really a combination for me as to someone's heard it, great, let's look at it. Someone approaches me initially, I'm interested. I think from a long-term strategy, this makes sense. Let's explore and see what's going on. That's one of the current solutions that actually we're moving forward with implementation. That's what happened. It's a large-scale implementation, and I was just introduced to it. And like, this sounds really interesting. It's going to change the way we do manufacturing. And it's been a 2-year journey, and here we are in the implementation phase of it.
All right. Well, since you started off on something super interesting, do you think that's something that you can unpack for us a bit more so we can learn a little bit about what your buying process was for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, I was talking to one of our partners. I'm not going to take names, so I apologize.
Yeah,
but
no worries.
I was talking to a partner, and they said, "Hey, you're in the manufacturing industry. Here is something to think about digital manufacturing. What does it really mean? You've talked about digital twins. You've talked about how do you improve manufacturing as a whole." And it got me thinking, because manufacturing, as I think most people would agree, is not in the cutting edge of technology. We don't use a lot of data from manufacturing itself, right? So how do you change that and you make it more data driven? How do you take that data and have insights and do analytics, predictive stuff on it? So it's something that I started pursuing with our leadership, saying, hey, we should think about this. It may not be in the near term, but something that we certainly, if we want to be leaders in the manufacturing space and we want to do better, let's take a look at this. Pursuing it, started looking at different partners and started seeing what solutions are out there.
Sorry to interrupt, Bharti. So it sounds like a partner brought up this idea of digital manufacturing that sounded intriguing to you, and then you started doing some more research. Obviously, you were going back and forth with your management team, and while you were championing the idea or the high-level concept, it sounds like you also started going down the path of evaluating different vendors. Is my understanding right?
Correct.
So the follow-up there is, how did you come across these vendors, or were they already reaching out to you, or did you go out and start looking for solutions?
It was, again, a combination. They heard that we were looking. Again, someone previously had worked with it and they knew that this vendor had a solution in place. Let's take a look at it. So we found like 4 or 5 vendors who had these kind of futuristic solutions. I wouldn't say futuristic, but sort of futuristic solutions in place. And so we're like, okay, let's start talking to them. But it was, again, one was, we were introduced to someone, and then there was another person that knew of a vendor that they were working with that had the solution in place. The other one approached us because they heard from third party that we're looking to do digital manufacturing. They reached out to us. So it was a combination of various inputs and various ways of reaching out.
Got it. So those outbound and inbound, and it sounds like one of the sources of vendor for you was through a customer reference. So somebody you said was using one of those products and they had a good experience and shared that with you. Is that right?
That is one of it, yes.
Got it.
I think what's so interesting about this is, like a marketer and having, been a CEO at a startup and done marketing in a bunch of different facets over the years, is in that one example, you provide so many different modes of engaging with the customer. There's the video, you're kind of getting at this, right? Like there's outbound stuff, but like there's the continued cadence, which you're in the person's, inbox or whatever, is enough that at that moment when it's relevant. I came across this before. There's reference selling where there's customers who are referenceable. There's network selling. And so it's just interesting to hear all of those different modalities in just the one example that you provide. That's interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Bharti, we are looking at it through the lens of, marketing and sales and all of that. So it's fascinating.
It is. I can say that even now that we're going down this path of implementation, it's a startup. And I am being a reference customer to others who are interested, right? Especially in the bottling community. It is big enough, but it's also small enough. I'm being a reference customer now for them.
Oh, I'm sure they are super thankful to you for that. It seems like during this journey where, you were looking to do digital manufacturing, two things seem to be happening in parallel. So one is you were going back and forth with your leadership team, trying to build some traction for this whole notion of digital manufacturing. And at the same time, you were also exploring in the market, talking to different vendors, trying to get some sense for what is possible. At what point, I wonder here, were you trying to like really quantify what the return on investment would be for you, Swire, if you went down a certain path with a certain vendor?
Yeah. We didn't go down the path of ROI until we started the POC, right? So because we had 4 different vendors that we were looking at, we said, hey, you know what? We should be doing a POC. We couldn't make up our mind just looking and talking to people saying, we're going to pursue this partner. So we went down the path of doing a POC with all 4 of them, gave each partner the same problem to solve. And how did they go down that path? What happened? And that's when you start talking about the costs and everything of implementation, right? This is not a small implementation. It's a large 2-year, 3-year roadmap implementation. At that point is when we started going down the path, when we started getting the costs associated with it, we started putting the ROI together.
Was it really like an ROI or more of just like a business justification that includes cost? And just since that like sounds like a leading question, I think I've seen this trap or this temptation in startups where they're like, we got to build an ROI calculator, or we got to and they take it very literally and not necessarily like, well, what role does something like cost or return play in a business value assessment? So was it like a hard ROI or was it more of a business justification?
I think it was both for us, Tim.
Okay.
ROI, because it's quite the investment, but also from a business value justification, it's not just the near term, right? It's also long-term vision. What do we want to do? And that was important for us. So to your point about people do take into cost, cost was, yes, it was a factor for us, but it's also what do we want to do long term? How do we want to leverage this capability that we're going to implement? What does that mean from a long-term strategy standpoint?
Thanks. That makes sense. Okay.
The solution that you were looking for, is it fair to say that it was not a replacement for something you already had? It sounds like this is a brand new product / category you were trying to bring on board.
It's a combination, Vidya. And so that's what is so special about this project for me is we were replacing something that's in place already, that's decades old, very different, and was a replacement, but it's also from a new product standpoint, it's completely different and it enables a forward-looking AI-driven strategy for us.
Gotcha. That is very interesting. My next question was going to be about, new product category and existing product category. So you made things a little bit harder for me by putting it in a third category. That's great. This next section, we want to talk about a few things which founders can hopefully tease out of this different aspects, of buying motions that would make sense for different kinds of products. So as an example, when we say existing product, selling it into an enterprise where a startup is trying to rip and replace a tool, right? So that would be one. So a simple example here would be if there is an existing BI tool that's maybe it's aged and it's not keeping up with the trends, then maybe there is a better mousetrap out there that you might want to look at, versus a brave new world kind of example would be like a GitHub Copilot, right? I mean, pretty popular these days, but that's something that did not exist, at least not in the current shape or form, maybe more of an autocomplete in an editor, but not in its current shape and form even like 2 years ago. So the third category is where you were, right? It was a combination of replacing something you already had, but in addition, bringing on some new capabilities. And then in this new category, you also ended up choosing to work with a startup, which is really incredible. So question I have for you is, when you come across a startup trying to pitch you a substitute for something you already have, right? What advice do you have for those founders? Are you going to be looking feature to feature parity, which obviously is very tough for founders to do? What advice do you have? How should they approach trying to replace a product that someone like Swire already has?
Good question. For me personally, I think it's not necessarily feature to feature parity. For me, it is the why. Why should I be going with your product? At the end of the day, the switch cost is usually high, right? When you're trying to replace a product. So help me understand, why would I incur the switch cost by switching to your product? That is the key. So it goes back to your original question about what is it that the founder should know about, my company before they come and pitch a product to me. Learn about what my company is doing, how they are using a product potentially that their product will replace with what I'm using today. And tell me the why. Why should I incur that switch cost? That's the most important thing to me.
Yeah. And I think in that context, AI, like you mentioned, so driving a forward-looking AI strategy is obviously key for Swire, as it is with many other enterprises these days. And it looks like that could be a good angle for a company building a new category or even trying to disrupt an incumbent.
Absolutely.
What about pricing for some of these products? Obviously, if it's just a one-for-one replacement, right, then you have some reference pricing. There's something that you can compare with. But when a company is pitching you something in a category that doesn't exist, or like in your case, it's something above and beyond the kinds of problems you were already able to solve with your existing product, how are you thinking about pricing? Do you do a total cost of ownership on something, or are you trying to have cost parity with what you already have? How do you go about that internally?
So with the product we're trying to replace, you talked about BI tools earlier. So I'll give you an example. So a couple of years ago when I joined, we had a different BI tool, and then it was cost prohibitive for us. It was expensive. It wasn't doing the job that we really wanted it to do, right? So we then went down the path of what's the next best option that still has the same features and the parity, but is not that expensive. It does a better job and it integrates with all of our other solutions that we have today. Right? So it was cost, it was integration, was easy to use as we were going down the self-service strategy route. This is a much easier tool to use. All of that was all taken into consideration. But pricing does come into picture when you try and compare, you're replacing to a comparable product for sure.
We have time for one more question for you. And just on this whole kind of purchase process and, regards to its price comparison, what have you, one of the things that I know is frustrating for founders and the early sales teams in startups when they're pursuing enterprises, is that there's this allure of enterprises have large budgets. They, we can win some bigger deals, but they also take longer. It's just the tension, the stress that goes along with it. So do you have any guidance to a startup, sales team, a founder that could potentially help accelerate either the decision-making or the purchase process, or they kind of stuck there? Like anything they could do in parallel or help you do more quickly from a timing perspective?
Couple of things. It depends on what your product is, right, Tim? I think if it's a product that is not as expensive, or you're not trying to replace another tool that exists today, there's a lot of that switch cost. And so people are going to be a little worried about that. But if it's a brand new application that you're selling to the organization and it's not as heavy of an investment, I think that moves a little bit faster. So even in my own world, we were able to implement, say, a data cataloging tool much faster. The process was maybe a couple of months, maybe 3 months. We still did a POC. We still, compared products, but it was much faster turnaround time. But when I went to digital manufacturing, it did take me a longer time because it was, again, a lot more investment. There was a lot more people involved, and we had to make sure the business was brought into the solution. It's a technical product versus a business product, and how are you trying to replace? It does take time. I get frustrated sometimes by the procurement process, and not because people are not doing it and we're not going as fast, but it is a long process, unfortunately. The one thing that does differentiate a founder or a partner is knowing the business, right? They listen to what you're trying to solve for. They are working with you to solve that problem. That in the digital manufacturing project was a key thing for us, that the partner that we are partnering with today heard what problem we were trying to solve. They asked us, what are you trying to solve for?
It's a great place to end. That's a really good insight. And I think probably one of the, the most, if not one of the most important things for, any, founder or not, really any good salesperson to help make sure that they're doing in order to help their customers succeed. So Bharathi, thank you. It was really great to get a chance to meet you today on the show, hear from you, hear your insights for our listener base. So just thanks for your time, your willingness to share all of this. It was insightful. And I think this gave a great sense to our listeners around kind of the product adoption thinking, the purchasing from an organization like yours and the kind of process and thinking you go through. So they found that valuable as well. And so, yeah, thanks again and have a great one.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Vidya. It was great being on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Enterprise GTM podcast. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on your favorite podcast platform so we can continue to help enterprise founders thrive.